This is an Eye on Annapolis bonus podcast.
Well, joining us on the phone today is Dr. Martin Wasserman, who is a retired pediatrician, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct.
You have a long and storied career, including a stint as the Secretary of Health and Mental Hygiene, serving under Governors William Donald Schaffer, a character in and of himself, and Paris Glendenning, who I run into in the post office, it seems, every other week here in Annapolis. How are you today?
I'm very good. It was interesting because I served under Governor Schaffer for about a month. It was an interim appointment, but it was really nice to get to know him. And it's true, he truly is a character, but just a very decent person.
Oh, but between him and Louis Goldstein, I mean, it's just, wow.
Oh, absolutely.
That is for sure. Well, a podcast listener here had contacted me and said that you had an incredibly interesting story. And after she told me a little bit about it, I totally agree. You're 81 years old. You enjoy swimming, which is not really unusual for adult recreation. I mean, golf, tennis, swimming, that makes sense. But you took it a little bit further than that, and you've swum the Great Chesapeake Bay Swim 25 times. That correct?
That's true. At the 23rd one, you crossed 100 miles in the bay.
Okay, I never even thought to think of it that way. That's 100 miles.
You get to think about a lot of things while you're in the water. It's not a very social sport. It's you, your brain, and the passage of time and rhythms.
Well, for those that are not in the know, excepting the COVID years, the swim is a 4.4-mile swim from Sandy Point State Park here over on the western shore to what is now Libby's Coastal Kitchens. It used to be Hemingway's over there on Kent Island near the Bay Bridge Marina. And I think it's the second Sunday, but it's every June. And it is an incredible race to cheer on the folks, whether you're on the shore or lucky enough to be out in a boat or possibly even volunteering to in a canoe or a kayak to make sure everybody sort of stays in between the spans. And I mean, most people would never think about doing this once, but you've done it 25 times at age 81. I mean, when did this obsession start?
Well, I've swum nearly all my life. Started swimming when I was 5 years old. Did my first competition when I was 13. Swam in college. Did a little bit of masters and got out of it, but then started to stay in shape when I've run a number of local public health agencies, and so to stay in shape as I got older, I found swimming to be both, for me, a joy. The only downside of swimming is, you mentioned tennis and golf. It's not a social sport. I mean, you do swimming, you are by yourself, but it's very contemplative, and it serves the purpose of just the rhythm and the breathing. And it's just, for me, it's just a way of getting away and being isolated, alone, in kind of in nature.
You know, I hear that. I go out and I walk every morning. I try to walk 4 miles every morning, and I've had so many people say, "Hey, can I join you?" And I'm like, "No." I mean, I'm not that I don't like you or anything like that, but I do like to be alone with my own thoughts, and you know, maybe it's listening to a podcast or some music, or you know, just walking through the woods or whatever it may be. And there's something to be said about that. I think it's healthy, actually.
I think it is too.
Do that. When was your first bay swim?
It was actually the first year I was health secretary, so it was June 11th, which happened to be Paris Glendenning's birthday. It was June 11th, 1995. And then I swum nearly every year except for one when I was supposed to be in Oregon as their health secretary. That's a different story. And then I had an illness 1 year, and then it was closed for COVID. But the year that I didn't swim because of illness, they had some weather problems, and so they did not swim between the spans. So I swum nearly every swim since 1995 that was open between the spans.
Wow. Well, what possessed you to swim it back in 95? Was it just walking the walk?
Well, it was one where I was trying to set an example because of my position and as a physician representing the state, and talking about good nutrition and good health and activities and exercise. I committed to swimming the bay, and I knew that if I made a public commitment and kept coming back to it as I would give talks and personalize them, it would force me through accountability to actually do the swim that year, and it would also possibly encourage others to take on kind of additional challenges with regard to their health and special activities.
Where does this fall in, like, the whole endurance events? I mean, you've got the marathons and the triathlons and the Ironmans and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes you think swimming is kind of leisurely. I mean, obviously it's not in the bay, but I mean, does this rank up there with a marathon? Have you ever done a marathon, I guess?
I've not done a marathon. I bike, but I can tell you the marathon only does, or the Ironman is only a 2-mile swim, and they'll do the 100-mile bike, I think, in a 26-mile run. But they don't do the 4-mile swim. It's one of the bay swim is one of the premier outdoor swims, open water swims in the world, just because of its location, and it's the equivalent. Good swimmers will swim probably about 4 to 1. It's if you can do a mile in 4 minutes, you'll do a 16-minute swim or better on both sides, but that's about it.
Okay. All right. Interesting. Well, I know that I was looking at some of the results from this year, and I mean, you've had representatives from age 13 to 81. I mean, you were the anchor, the anchor man, I guess.
I truly was the anchor dragging through the water.
Well, no, I mean, you absolutely weren't. I mean, the best time was a 17-year-old from Crofton in 1 hour and 35 minutes, and you just chalk that up to being a kid. But the last finisher was 24 from Stevensville, and he was at almost 4 hours. He was 3 hours and 57 minutes. But you were a lot less than that. You were about 3 hours and 20 minutes.
Right.
So,
but actually, it was a tough swim this year. At least it was tough for me, and it was that was my slowest swim. I've done it, but my best swim was around 2:20, and this year it was 3:20. And each swim is different. Actually, each stroke can be different. The temperature can change in an instant. The currents can change. The winds can change. It's totally unpredictable, and I think that's what makes it so exciting and so challenging and so, I guess, anxiety-provoking in the 2 weeks leading up to it.
Well, how do you train for this? I mean, I'm assuming that you swim pretty much year-round, but not in 4-mile increments.
No, I'll swim. When I go into the pool, I used to swim 2 miles 5 days a week when I was working full-time. And it's interesting that when you have more time, it's harder to be as disciplined. So now I swim 2 or 3 times a week, and most of it is 2 miles, but occasionally I'll drop down to 1.5, always at least 1.5 miles every time I go into the pool. I used to do 2 miles in just under an hour. Now it's 1.5 miles in just under an hour. So age over the past 20 years has taken a considerable toll on the time. I've slowed down, but the point is, as my physician says, how many 81-year-olds are swimming the bay and stop complaining because it's a good form of exercise and you're in pretty good shape and pretty good health.
Wow. I'll say I every time I see this swim, I'm amazed at the range of ages, the endurance. And I remember one year there was an attorney from, I think he was from New York. And what was unusual about him was that he was a quadriplegic, a quad amputee. So he had, no arms and no legs. He was outfitted with a fin or a flipper on his lower torso. and he was slathered in zinc oxide and was, paddled across the bay on his back.
Wow.
And I'm like, this is absolutely amazing. I mean, he didn't win, obviously, and he was not last. But I'm like, what can the human body not do when it's really forced to do something like that?
I've seen some of the swimmers who have had disabilities and what they're able to do, and it's really, I have a good blind friend in what he's able to do and negotiating a world that is difficult when you have all of your faculties intact, and then to see some of these incredible physical feats done by people who don't have the gifts that most of us have and most of us squander. But it truly is, and I had met a young woman pediatrician who had done the bay with, she had an unfortunate motorcycle accident when she was, I guess, in college, and she had a great career medically, and she swam as a partial amputee.
Wow, that's we're getting sort of way off the topic here, but in our lifetimes, we have seen the ability for older people, for people with disabilities or differing abilities, and kids would have been born with Down syndrome. That's okay. Well, let's institutionalize them. That's what we do. When my grandparents' generation, my grandparents weren't like that, but I mean, it was, when they turned 60, okay, we need to go get the walker and, shop for nursing homes and everything else. And, my father, he's passed on now, but, he was traveling in his 90s. I mean, he was, off to Europe with his wife, and it's amazing how far we've come to be able to accommodate everybody and the desire for people to be accommodated. It's a wonderful place we are right now, I think.
From 1900 to 2000, we gained a year in expected longevity for every 3 years of that century. So we gained 30 years of life in that 30 to 33 years of life between 1900 and 2000. So, like 55 to 85 or whatever it was, 50 to 80.
That's crazy. Well, I mean, how did you prepare for this race? I mean, this is your 25th. This is a big race. I mean, you're getting older. I mean, as you said, that your times are getting slower, and I'm sure it's each succeeding year is a little bit more difficult. But how do you prepare for this? How do you train?
Well, as I said, I train year round, so I'm in the pool at least 2 to 3 days a week doing that mile and a half. But I started getting serious in March and April, and what I started a tradition when I was health secretary, when the legislative session ended, sine die, there's a big party at midnight. And everybody goes out and celebrates and gets drunk. And the next day, people are hung over. And what I did the next day after a brief celebration, while everybody else took the day off from work, I went to my swimming pool and did a 4.5 mile swim. And that started a tradition for me. On the day after sine die, I go into the pool and do a 4.5 mile swim. As I got older, the notion that on the Tuesday after that Monday that I would have to be in the water and do a 4.5 mile swim made me go into the pool one day and say, let's not do it that day. Why don't we do it right now, today? And so for the past several years, I'll just walk into the pool one day and say, okay, how do you feel? Let's go for it. And today, or this year, it was walked in the pool one day, and 3 hours later, I walked out and people said, what do you do? What were you doing? I said, I was practicing for the pay. It was 4.5 miles, and it was 3 hours.
Wow. Awesome. 25th, what was so special about this race? I mean, obviously that's a huge number. You said 24 was your 100 miles in the bay. Was there anything special?
23.
23?
23. Well, 25 was just, for me, a landmark. They identify in 5-year increments. And so you'll get a little plaque for doing 5, 10, or I guess it's 10, 15, 20. So I had a 15-year and a 20-year, and it took a while because of COVID and the injury that I had to get to 25. And I'm getting older. There's no guarantee that when you leave Sandy Point that you're going to get to the other side. I decided, that I'm going to have to be pulled out. I'm going to have some kind of a medical problem that's going to prevent me from, where it becomes life-threatening to go in. What was interesting this year, John, was that when you were signing in, you had the opportunity, if you wanted or thought you might need special assistance, you could choose a red rather than a green cap. This year, the green cap was the official bay swim cap. And I think I may have been the only person to select the red cap. And the reason that I did that, it was a very purposeful decision. I knew from past swims that when I went to get out, the balance, and as I got older, my balance is not as good, but after swimming horizontally for 4.5 miles, you get up and then you stand and you start to walk. And I would falter and a couple times fall. And I might need, one year I actually needed some help. It was before I had a hip replaced. And so somebody actually came down and helped me get up and helped assist me over the finish line. So I figured if I needed assistance, if I wore the red cap, I'd be easily picked out. So I did that, but then I said, that's not macho to wear, to point out your vulnerabilities. And then I started to think about the public health messaging, and I thought, if anyone asked me, why did you choose to wear a red cap? And it was safety over vanity. The reason that I wouldn't have worn a red cap was I was too vain and I didn't want to identify myself. And I decided I would make that statement. And as I looked at some of the videos, not the videos, but the pictures of people finishing the race, I only saw one guy in a red cap, and that was me. And in the middle of the race, I think it was the third mile, the currents were picking up, and I was being pushed toward the north span of the bridge. And which, you come out on the south span, so this makes it really difficult to exit when you're particularly tired. But so as I'm being threatened to be disqualified, I noticed the kayaker following me, and he followed me for about 200 yards. And I'm thinking, this guy is going to disqualify me. And then I said, he sees me in a red cap, and he knows that I know that I might have difficulty, and he's just going to rescue me. And what it did was, the next thing I remember swimming hard, and then I found myself miraculously, and I don't know, teleportation or whatever, but I was back in the middle of the bay, and the kayaker was gone. And then it took a while to get back to get through the spans and out on that last half mile of the swim.
Well, there you are that's your aloneness, your brain, and your mental acuity to turn around and all of a sudden it happens there. That's pretty neat. What have you had any memorable races? Which ones are the most memorable for you?
Well,
good, bad, or indifferent.
Well, most of them are the challenge. The first year was when I did it was the currents were. I did not anticipate the currents. I know there were several times where I came very, very close to swimming under one of the spans, which is a disqualification. So that was one. There was one where the temperatures of the water were down at, I think it was 64 degrees, and a number of people were hypothermic.
Sure.
Barbara said that she heard a number of ambulances taking people out of the water. She said, when I came out, I was ashen gray. And I guess it's the terror of not finishing that warmed me up, and the adrenaline. I can't give you a physiological reason, but that was memorable. There was another one where I thought they should have actually not held the swim, because that week the winds were up around 20 miles an hour, and I looked at what that was, and pretty tough swim, but they said that the winds were predominantly they were coming from the west toward the east. And if anything, they were going to make this one of your better swims. But there were gusts that year up to 40 miles an hour. And I had to swim. I swim and breathe on both sides. But I had to alternate breathing so that I didn't inhale waters. And there were times where I'm sure that there were waves that were, 1 or 2 feet high. It felt like I was just bobbing in the water, and I couldn't see. I couldn't see anything but the next wave in front of me. So that was probably the most memorable, other than the times, the past two, where the currents toward the end were really very, very strong, and it was difficult. The currents and the tides seemed to be coming from pushing you toward the west and north, and your direction was south and east. So, and this was while, the guy who finished was on the shore, eating a pizza, changing clothes and watching a movie, while the rest of us, while I'm still in the pool, they're still in the bay swimming. The other thing that was memorable this year, which we hadn't discussed, was when I finished the swim last year. I was 80, the oldest finisher. And I was feeling pretty good. 80 years old. I was at the bay. Somebody invited me in Blackwater to do a 50-mile bike ride 3 weeks later. And I did that, and saying, wow, you're 80 years old. This is fantastic. And then we have horses, and my horse threw me for the first time in a decade, and picked myself up, went to the mirror and looked at the bruises and saw that I had put on a considerable amount of weight. And so I said, for your 25th swim, why don't you make a commitment to drop 20 pounds and get into the wetsuit that you wore back in 1995 for your first swim? And so I was thinking about that, and about a month later or 3 weeks later at the PCRM annual meeting, where they talk about the benefits, the health benefits, the weight reduction benefits, the dealing with obesity and diabetes, which I don't have, but of a vegan plant-based diet. I said, that's the vehicle. If I go vegan and plant-based, that's how I will lose weight, be healthy, and get into the swim. And so during that conference at the dinner on Friday night, I was sitting with a number of PCRM folks, and I said, I'm going to create Project Wetsuit. I'm going to get into the wetsuit that I wore 25, 30 years ago, 1995, and I'm going to do that through a vegan diet. I'm going to lose 20 pounds. And they said, that's wild. That's fantastic. And the woman who runs the research, for whom I do some, I'm the safety monitor for the research experiments, said, well, why don't I help coach you? And so every Monday, for the first couple of months, we would have a brief conference call, and now it's just come to weigh in on Mondays. But the first time, her name is Dr. Hanna Kaliova. She's Czech, but brilliant English. And when you can do humor in another language, subtle humor in another language, that really speaks to your brilliance. Well, she said our first meeting, she wanted my height and weight, and was figuring out my body mass index. And she said, do you want to lose 20 pounds? She said, when you lose 20 pounds, you'll still be overweight. If you lose 30 pounds, you'll then be at an appropriate weight for your age. just make it. And I said, oh, this is going to be tough working with her. 20 pounds isn't good enough. And that's an opening salvo. And so she kept pushing, and she kept me on the straight and narrow. And every time I would falter, she would, pick me up and encourage and cheerlead and remind me to, what the goal was. And I was going to put the wetsuit on I was 195 when I started. So if I got to 175, and I weighed myself every day, if I got to 175 and I could hold that weight for 3 consecutive days or 5 days out of 8, that would be a signal that I could try on the wetsuit. So the first day I got under 175, it says 169 something, and I held that for 3 days. And people had said, this 25-year-old wetsuit, you're going to try and get into it, and it's going to crack on you. But it was, I'm not sure what it was made of. It was a different product. It's not as sleek as the current one that I have. But sure enough, I got into it, and Hannah said, well, that's good. You got that goal, but why don't you keep going? Because there were still a few months before the Bay Swim, so it was, why don't you go in 5-pound increments? So it was get to 170, and then it was get under 170, and believe it or not, but the Saturday before the Sunday swim, I was at 164.1.
Fantastic.
And so
congratulations on that. That's for sure. And you owe this to a vegan diet, and obviously some exercise. But yeah, wow.
Yeah, it was the diet and truly the discipline. When I'm focused, and just like in the swim, when I'm focused, it's a pretty powerful laser focus. So that this past year, for the most part, I was pretty focused. I could go into the refrigerator or the pantry and see the things that I would ordinarily eat. And at least for the first 6 months, I was totally disciplined. And if you look at the graph of weight loss, it's just a straight shot down and it took about from August through, I think, mid-October, early October to lose the first 20 pounds. And then another 3 months for the next 5 pounds, I guess.
Yeah, wow.
Whatever.
Are you still keeping it off?
That was 165 yesterday. It was 167 today. So it stayed around between 165 and 170 for most of the last month or 6 weeks. I've relaxed that discipline a little bit. There'll be some crackers and some wine, but we were at the beach. We were at Rehoboth for a week, and there was, I'd walk the boardwalk, and all of those things that are enticing and totally unhealthy and fattening. I didn't do it. Not a one. Would go back home and cook my tofu and vegetable dishes that I've grown to really love over this past year. Hannah said, because I said, the day after the swim, it's over. And she said, well, let's just focus on the swim. She says, because what's going to happen? And this was one of her early, post, you got to get down to 165 comments. So when you get past the swim, you're going to think about it, and you're going to say, I feel pretty healthy and I look pretty good. And, this diet has become a habit and a way of life, and I'm going to stick to it. And so now when I go off, and I will go off it at times, there's a guilt feeling. So I'm pretty much vegetarian, maybe 90%, 85, 90% vegan.
Awesome. Well, congratulations on everything, man. On the weight loss, on the 25th swim, and your career. It sounds like you're having a wonderful retirement. I mean, certainly not letting any moss grow on that side. I guess, Dr. Wasserman, before we wrap it up, one last question I have for you: is there a 26 swim?
Oh yeah. It would be great to do that swim at the same weight and it would be nice to be a little stronger. It's going to take more discipline to do the strength training for some reason than the diet. I'm not exactly sure why. That's what I'd like to do for next year, but I'll be satisfied to get in the water and do that swim next year. In fact, there is an older fellow who that I met. He did not finish last year's swim, and I tried reaching him. Right now, he's 87 years old. He was signed up to do this year's swim, but in April, he told me, and I spoke with him just before the swim this year. In April, he was doing a 4-mile swim, and he felt a twinge in his shoulder. And so 2 weeks ago, he had rotator cuff surgery.
Oh.
So he was out this year, but we've become friends. I've said there's nothing I would like more than getting to the shore with you next year and being number 2 in the finishers. And he'll be 88 years old when I'm 82.
That's wild. That'd be awesome. Yeah. That would be awesome.
He's got more. He's done some swims in England, he does a lot more international type swimming. So I haven't met him. He had a surgery in Baltimore and moved from Gaithersburg to Pennsylvania. But one of his times when he comes into Baltimore, we're going to meet for the first time, and it will be wonderful to get to know him. He's a very interesting guy.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Wasserman, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your service to the state of Maryland as the Secretary of Health and Mental Hygiene back in the day. And for those that may be thinking about this Bay Swim, you want to go to bayswim.com, and that's where it gives you sort of the information. And ultimately, you can register after you get in shape. But you're going to have to watch out for Dr. Wasserman because he's going back for swim 26.
And he'll be behind you. And if you're interested in staying healthy, go to pcrm.org, and you can find recipes for vegan diets and all sorts of information on a wonderful organization that focuses on health and well-being for the planet.
Well, I'm definitely going to check that out, and I appreciate your time and getting to know you. And wow, congratulations on all that you've accomplished, and certainly the least of which is this Chesapeake Bay Swim. Thank you so much.
Well, thanks a lot, John.
This has been a bonus podcast from Ion Annapolis. Please visit us at ionannapolis.net. Follow us on Facebook at All Annapolis and on Twitter at Ion Annapolis. And if you haven't subscribed to the Daily News Brief podcast, go for it. And all of your local news will be delivered to your phone, tablet, or smart device by 6 a.m. every Monday through Friday.